the salt wind carries a secret that changed everything you know. Every word you have ever read, every letter you have ever written, traces back to 22 symbols carved by merchants who sail beyond the edge of the known world. Welcome, traveler, to the shores of Phoenicia. Stand here with me on this narrow strip of coastline where the Lebanon mountains plunge into waters so blue they seem to hold the sky itself. Behind us rise forests of cedar, trees so magnificent that pharaohs and kings sent fortunes to possess them. Before us stretches the Mediterranean, an endless highway that these people transformed from a barrier into a bridge connecting every civilization of the ancient world. But here is what makes this story extraordinary. The Phoenicians never conquered vast territories. They never fielded massive armies or built monuments to glorify military triumph. Instead, they achieved something far more remarkable. They created an empire of ideas, of commerce, of innovation that outlasted every kingdom that ever tried to dominate them. When Assyrian war machines rolled toward their gates, they adapted. When Babylonian armies besieged their island fortress for 13 years, they endured. When Alexander himself built a causeway to breach their walls, their alphabet had already spread so far that even his own scribes used letters born in these very harbors. This is the complete story of Phoenicia, and I promise you a journey unlike any other. We will begin 3,000 years before the Common Era, when simple fishing villages first dotted this rocky coast. We will watch as Byblos becomes Egypt's gateway to cedar wealth, as Tyre rises on its island stronghold, as Sidon's craftsmen master the art of glass that seems to capture liquid light. Together, we will witness King Hiram I forge his legendary alliance with Solomon, sending skilled workers and precious timber to build the Temple of Jerusalem. We will follow their ships beyond the Pillars of Hercules into Atlantic waters no Mediterranean sailor had ever seen. We will stand in the workshops where murex shells yielded purple dye worth more than gold, coloring the robes of emperors and marking royalty for millennia to come. We will sail with Queen Dido to the African coast and watch Carthage rise from a desperate refuge into a power that would one day challenge Rome itself. We will trace every triumph and every tragedy, from Golden Age to Hellenistic twilight, from commercial dominance to final destruction. This is not a fragment or an overview. This is the full passage through a civilization that proved power flows not only from conquest, but from creativity. Not only from armies, but from alphabets. If you find wonder in these complete journeys through ancient worlds, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a lost civilization, told from beginning to end, with all the detail and depth these remarkable peoples deserve. Now, let us begin our journey in the mists of the Bronze Age, when the first Phoenician ancestors cast their nets into these waters and dreamed of horizons they could not yet imagine. The Mediterranean stretches endless and blue beneath a sky unmarked by sail or smoke. Along the eastern shore, where mountains tumble steep and sudden into the sea, a narrow ribbon of land catches the morning light. This is the Levantine coast, perhaps 30 kilometers wide at its broadest, hemmed between cedar-crowned peaks and restless waters. Here, around 3,000 years before the Common Era, something begins. The geography itself seems designed for what will come. The Lebanon mountains rise like a wall behind the coast, their western slopes catching moisture from sea winds, feeding forests of cedar and pine that will one day build the ships of kings. Between these heights and the water, small plains open where rivers descend from the highlands. Each river mouth creates a natural harbor, a place where boats can shelter from storms and fresh water meets salt. The earliest settlements cluster around these protected coves. Mud brick dwellings rise on rocky promontories, their walls thick against winter winds. Fishing communities take shape, their lives governed by the rhythms of tide and season. Small boats of bundled reeds venture into sheltered waters, returning with catches of sea bream and mullet. The sea provides, and the people learn its moods. Byblos emerges first among these coastal villages, its position at the mouth of the Adonis River, offering both harbor and hinterland. The settlement grows on a limestone bluff overlooking the water, its houses gradually replacing reed and mud with cut stone. By 2,800 years before the Common Era, a recognizable town takes shape, its streets winding between workshops and dwellings, its harbor busy with the coming and going of simple craft. The forests prove as valuable as the sea. Cedar wood, straight-grained and fragrant, resists rot and insects. The trees grow massive in the mountain valleys, some reaching 40 meters toward the sky. Felling them requires bronze axes and organized labor. Dragging the logs down mountain slopes to the coast demands roads, ropes, and collective effort. Trade in timber begins to shape these communities, demanding skills beyond fishing and farming. Egypt notices. The great civilization of the Nile lacks suitable wood for construction and shipbuilding. The cedars of Lebanon become objects of desire, and Byblos becomes the port through which they flow southward. Egyptian goods begin appearing in coastal settlements, pottery and jewelry and worked stone exchanged for timber and resin. The relationship between coast and river valley deepens across centuries. Other settlements grow along this shore. Sidon rises on a promontory with twin harbors, one facing north, one south, offering shelter regardless of wind direction. Tyre begins as two rocky islands just offshore, their separation from the mainland providing natural defense. Arwad takes shape on an island farther north, its entire surface eventually covered with buildings rising several stories high. Each location offers something the others lack. Each develops its own character, its own specialties, its own relationship with the sea and the lands beyond. They are not yet the great cities they will become. They are not yet Phoenician, for that name lies far in the future, but they are learning, they are building. They are beginning to understand that the sea is not a barrier, but a road, and that the narrow coast they inhabit connects rather than confines. The Bronze Age unfolds across the eastern Mediterranean, and these coastal communities find their place within its networks of exchange. Copper from Cyprus, tin from distant sources, gold from Egypt, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, all pass through ports that grow more sophisticated with each generation. The people of the coast become intermediaries, translators between cultures, carriers of goods and ideas across waters that others fear to cross. Stone temples rise at Byblos, dedicated to a goddess the Egyptians recognize as their own Hathor. The blending begins early, this willingness to adopt and adapt, to find common ground with trading partners, to make the foreign familiar. It is a skill that will serve these coastal people well through millennia of contact with empires greater than themselves. The foundations are laid in these centuries before history properly records them. Harbors deepen, ships improve, trade routes extend. A civilization takes its first uncertain steps toward the sea that will define it. The mountains remember what the sea forgets. High above the coastal settlements, where mist clings to ancient slopes, the cedar forests stand in cathedral silence. Trees older than any human memory reach toward clouds that drift in from distant waters. Their trunks rise straight and true, some spanning the width of 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder, their wood fragrant with resins that seem to hold the essence of eternity itself. Egypt hungers for these giants. The Nile Valley, blessed with fertile soil and predictable floods, lacks the timber necessary for temples, palaces, and the great ships that carry pharaohs into the afterlife. Acacia and sycamore grow along the river's banks, but nothing compares to the Lebanon cedar. Nothing else possesses that combination of strength, workability, and resistance to decay that makes it precious beyond gold. Byblos rises to meet this hunger. By 2,300 years before the Common Era, the settlement has transformed from fishing village to international port. Egyptian ships arrive with increasing regularity, their holds filled with papyrus, linen, gold, and alabaster. They depart heavy with timber, their decks stacked with logs that will become the doors of temples, the masts of royal barges, the coffins of kings. The harbor expands to accommodate this traffic. Workers drive wooden pilings into the seabed, creating protected anchorages where vessels can load and unload regardless of weather. Stone quays extend into deeper water. Warehouses multiply along the waterfront, their interiors cool and dark, filled with goods awaiting transport in either direction. The relationship between Byblos and Egypt deepens into something approaching partnership. Egyptian craftsmen settle in the city, teaching techniques of stonework and metal craft. Bybloean merchants learn the hieroglyphic script, adapting it for their own record-keeping. The temple of Baalat Gebal, the Lady of Byblos, receives offerings from Egyptian pharaohs who recognize in her the face of their own goddess Hathor. Logging operations in the mountains become increasingly sophisticated. Teams of workers fell selected trees, leaving younger growth to mature for future harvests. Oxen drag the massive trunks down mountain paths worn smooth by generations of use. At the coast, the logs are floated in protected bays, lashed together into rafts for the journey south, or loaded aboard ships built specifically for the timber trade. The wealth that flows from this commerce transforms Bybloean society. A merchant class emerges, families whose prosperity depends not on land or livestock, but on the movement of goods across water. They build houses of cut stone, furnish them with Egyptian luxuries, and bury their dead with grave goods that speak of international connections. Other cities along the coast observe and learn. Sidon develops its own specialties. Arwad fortifies its island position. Tyre begins its slow rise from obscurity. Each finds its niche in the growing network of maritime trade, but Byblos remains preeminent, the gateway through which Egyptian influence flows northward and Levantine resources flow south. The ships themselves evolve. Builders experiment with hull designs that can carry heavier loads through rougher seas. Sails grow larger, allowing vessels to harness wind more efficiently. Navigation techniques improve as captains accumulate knowledge of currents, seasonal winds, and the stars that guide night passages. 5 centuries pass in this rhythm of commerce and growth. Dynasties rise and fall in Egypt, but the demand for cedar remains constant. Byblos prospers through political changes that destroy lesser trading partners. The city's merchants learn the essential skill of adaptation, of maintaining profitable relationships regardless of who wears the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. By 1800 years before the Common Era, the foundations of Phoenician civilization are firmly established. The cedar trade has created wealth, the wealth has funded innovation, and the innovation has opened new possibilities. The coastal cities stand poised at the threshold of even greater achievements, their harbors busy, their ships ranging ever farther across waters that are becoming familiar rather than fearsome. The coastal plain narrows as one moves southward from Byblos, the mountains pressing ever closer to the sea until only a ribbon of habitable land remains. Yet within this constricted geography, new powers are stirring. The centuries following 1800 years before the Common Era witness the emergence of rival city-states that will transform scattered settlements into an interconnected civilization of unprecedented maritime ambition. Tyre rises from the waves themselves. The city occupies two islands lying half a mile offshore, their rocky surfaces barely large enough to accommodate the growing population that crowds onto them. This seemingly disadvantageous position proves to be genius. The narrow channel separating the islands from the mainland creates a natural harbor, protected from storms and easily defended against landward attack. Fresh water presents the only challenge, solved through cisterns carved deep into the bedrock and supplemented by underwater springs that bubble up through the seafloor. The Tyrian builders work with what the sea provides. Massive limestone blocks, quarried from the mainland and ferried across the channel, form defensive walls that rise directly from the water's edge. There is no beach to storm, no gradual approach for attacking armies. Ships must navigate the harbor entrance under the watchful eyes of sentries posted on towers that command every angle of approach. The city becomes a fortress without ever intending to be one, its commercial advantages creating military impregnability as a fortunate consequence. Sidon develops along different lines. Positioned on a promontory jutting into the Mediterranean, the city commands a natural double harbor, one basin facing north and another south. This arrangement allows Sidonian ships to depart regardless of wind direction, a crucial advantage in an age when vessels depend entirely on sail and oar. The city's craftsmen begin experimenting with techniques that will later bring fame to Phoenician artisans everywhere. Glass workshops appear, their furnaces glowing through the night as workers discover that local sand, when heated to extreme temperatures, transforms into a substance of remarkable beauty and utility. Further north, Arwad claims its own island stronghold. Smaller than Tyre, but equally defensible, the city controls the northern approaches to the Phoenician coast. Its sailors range into waters that Byblos and Sidon rarely venture, establishing contacts with Cyprus and the Anatolian coast. The competition between these emerging powers drives innovation rather than conflict. Each city seeks advantage through better ships, finer goods, more distant trading connections. Urban planning advances with remarkable sophistication during these centuries. Streets follow logical patterns, channeling foot traffic and wheeled carts through commercial districts toward harbor facilities. Temples rise on elevated platforms, their limestone columns supporting cedar beams that span impressive distances. The religious architecture reflects both local traditions and Egyptian influences absorbed through generations of trade. Astarte receives worship in sanctuaries where incense smoke mingles with sea breeze, her cult promising fertility and protection to those who venture across dangerous waters. The defensive walls surrounding each city represent massive investments of labor and resources. Stone courses rise to heights of 20 feet or more, their surfaces carefully fitted to present smooth faces that resist scaling. Towers punctuate the walls at regular intervals, providing overlapping fields of observation and defense. Gates become elaborate structures, their passages designed to channel attackers into killing zones where defenders hold every advantage. Within these protected spaces, population density increases dramatically. Multi-story dwellings appear, their upper floors reached by external staircases. Workshops cluster in designated quarters, their activities generating noise and smoke that residential areas prefer to avoid. Water management systems channel rainfall into underground cisterns, while drainage channels carry waste toward the sea. The cities become self-contained worlds, capable of withstanding siege through stored provisions and collected rainwater. The period between 1800 and 1550 years before the Common Era establishes patterns that will define Phoenician civilization for a millennium. Independent city-states, fiercely protective of their autonomy, yet connected through shared language, religion, and commercial interests, create a network stronger than any single kingdom. The sea that separates them also unites them, its waters carrying goods, ideas, and ambitions between harbors that grow more prosperous with each passing generation. The shadow of empire falls across the Levantine coast like the slow creep of evening across harbor stones. By 1550 years before the Common Era, the Phoenician city-states find themselves caught between two colossal powers whose ambitions reshape the ancient world. To the south, Egypt's New Kingdom pharaohs extend their reach northward with armies and administrators. To the north, the Hittite Empire presses southward from Anatolia, its chariots and diplomats equally formidable. The Phoenician cities do not resist, they adapt. Egyptian garrisons establish themselves in coastal strongholds, their presence marked by granaries storing tribute grain and administrative buildings where scribes record the flow of goods toward the Nile. The pharaohs demand cedar, always cedar, along with copper, textiles, and the skilled craftsmen whose work adorns Egyptian temples. Tribute caravans wind southward through mountain passes, their donkeys laden with the wealth of the coast. Yet, tribute flows both ways. Egyptian gold, grain, and papyrus move northward, enriching the very cities that pay homage to distant pharaohs. The Phoenician merchant class discovers that submission to empire opens markets previously closed, that Egyptian protection allows ships to sail unmolested along coasts where pirates once lurked. The relationship becomes symbiotic, each party gaining from the arrangement. The Amarna letters reveal this complex dance of power and accommodation. Clay tablets inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform preserve the voices of Phoenician rulers addressing their Egyptian overlords. Rib-Hada of Byblos writes repeatedly to Pharaoh Akhenaten, his messages alternating between desperate pleas for military assistance and careful assurances of loyalty. The tablets speak of local conflicts, of neighboring cities threatening Byblos, of the constant maneuvering required to survive in a world of competing powers. Diplomatic correspondence becomes an art form. Phoenician scribes master multiple languages and writing systems, their skills essential for navigating the bureaucracies of empire. Archives accumulate in palace storerooms, their contents recording treaties, trade agreements, and the endless negotiations that keep the cities functioning under foreign oversight. The Hittite presence intensifies following the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 years before the Common Era. Though the engagement between Egyptian and Hittite forces proves inconclusive, its aftermath establishes a boundary that places some Phoenician cities within Egyptian spheres of influence, while others fall under Hittite oversight. The coastal populations learned to read the shifting winds of imperial politics, adjusting their allegiances as circumstances demand. Temple complexes expand during this period, their construction funded by wealth flowing through increasingly sophisticated trade networks. Religious practices blend local traditions with Egyptian and Mesopotamian influences, creating syncretic forms of worship that honor multiple divine powers. The gods themselves become diplomatic tools, their cults facilitating connections between distant peoples. Harbor facilities grow more elaborate as imperial trade demands greater capacity. Stone quays extend into deeper water, allowing larger vessels to load and unload without the delays of lightering cargo through smaller boats. Warehouse districts expand, their storage capacity measured in thousands of amphorae. The cities become essential nodes in networks spanning the eastern Mediterranean. Craftsmen refine their techniques under the pressure of imperial demand. Egyptian tastes influence Phoenician artistic production, while Phoenician skills shape objects destined for Egyptian temples and tombs. The exchange proves mutually enriching, each tradition absorbing elements from the other while maintaining distinctive characteristics. The period teaches lessons that will serve Phoenician civilization for centuries. Survival requires flexibility, the willingness to bend before superior force while preserving essential autonomy. Commerce provides leverage that military weakness cannot, making the cities too valuable to destroy, too useful to ignore. The shadow of empire, rather than crushing Phoenician independence, creates conditions under which maritime commerce flourishes as never before. The world burns at the close of the 13th century before the Common Era. From the Aegean to the Nile, from Anatolia to the Levantine coast, a catastrophe unfolds that will reshape the ancient Mediterranean beyond recognition. The great powers that dominated the Bronze Age, the Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greece, the Egyptian New Kingdom, stagger beneath blows delivered by forces still debated by scholars. Drought, famine, internal rebellion, and mysterious seaborne raiders combine into a perfect storm of destruction. The Sea Peoples arrive in waves, their origins obscured by time and fragmentary records. Egyptian inscriptions describe them with names that echo strangely across millennia: Peliset, Jaker, Shekelesh, Denian, Weshesh. Their ships appear on the horizon bearing warriors and families alike, entire populations in motion, seeking new homes in lands already stressed by climate change and failing harvests. The Hittite capital of Hattusa burns around 1,200 years before the Common Era, its archives abandoned to the flames. Ugarit, the great trading city north of the Phoenician heartland, falls never to rise again. Its final tablets record desperate pleas for military assistance that never arrives. The destruction corridor sweeps southward along the coast. Cities that flourish for centuries become ash and rubble. Trade networks that connected tin from distant lands to copper from Cyprus collapse overnight. The palatial economies that organized Bronze Age commerce disintegrate, their scribes scattered, their records lost, their administrative systems shattered beyond repair. Yet, the Phoenician cities endure. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad survived the catastrophe through a combination of geography, diplomacy, and maritime adaptability. The island fortress of Tyre proves particularly defensible, its separation from the mainland offering protection that coastal cities lack. The Phoenicians, already masters of naval craft, possess skills essential to any power seeking to control the sea lanes. They make themselves useful to successive waves of invaders, providing ships, sailors, and commercial expertise that conquerors need but cannot easily replicate. The collapse creates opportunity within catastrophe. With Ugarit destroyed, its trade routes lie open for Phoenician merchants to claim. The vacuum left by Mycenaean commercial networks invites expansion westward into waters previously dominated by Aegean powers. The disruption of overland trade routes through Anatolia increases the value of maritime commerce, rewarding those who can move goods safely across open water. The refugee movements that accompany the collapse bring skilled craftsmen to Phoenician shores. Metalworkers, potters, weavers, and scribes flee destroyed cities, seeking shelter in communities that still function. The Phoenician cities absorb these newcomers, incorporating their techniques and knowledge into local traditions. The fusion enriches Phoenician craftsmanship, adding new methods to already sophisticated workshops. The century and a half following the collapse witnesses Phoenician transformation from regional traders to Mediterranean-wide commercial power. The old constraints imposed by Egyptian and Hittite dominance evaporate. No imperial power remains strong enough to demand tribute or restrict Phoenician maritime activity. The cities enter an age of unprecedented independence, free to pursue commercial expansion limited only by their own ambition and capability. The harbors of Tyre and Sidon fill with ships bound for destinations their ancestors never imagined. Cyprus, already familiar, becomes a stepping stone toward the western Mediterranean. The Aegean islands, recovering slowly from Mycenaean collapse, offer markets hungry for Phoenician goods. The African coast stretches westward, its resources awaiting exploitation by those bold enough to venture beyond known waters. The darkness that descends upon the Bronze Age world paradoxically illuminates Phoenician destiny. From the ashes of fallen empires, the maritime cities rise toward their golden age. The stench rises from the shoreline like a living thing, acrid and overwhelming, settling into cloth and hair and memory. Along the beaches south of Sidon, where rocky pools trap the retreating tide, mountains of crushed shells bleach white beneath the Mediterranean sun. This is the smell of wealth beyond measure, the odor of empire in its making. The murex snail crawls slowly across the seabed, an unremarkable creature armored in spiraling calcium, feeding on the detritus of the deep. Within its body lies a gland no larger than a grain of wheat, containing a pale secretion that transforms upon exposure to sunlight into something extraordinary. The Phoenicians discovered this secret centuries before the Bronze Age collapse, but only now, in the decades following that catastrophe, does the purple dye industry achieve its full economic potential. Harvesting begins before dawn. Fishermen wade into shallow waters or dive from small boats, gathering murex by the thousands into woven baskets. The species Balanus brandaris yields a violet hue, while Hexaplex trunculus produces shades ranging from blue to reddish purple, depending on processing methods. Workers crack each shell individually, extracting the precious gland with bronze hooks before the creature dies, for death causes the secretion to lose its potency. The processing facilities cluster along beaches deliberately distant from residential quarters. Enormous ceramic vats, some measuring 3 meters across, line the shore in ordered rows. Workers crush the extracted glands with salt, allowing fermentation to proceed for 3 days under careful observation. The mixture then boils slowly over fires fed with driftwood and olive prunings, the liquid reducing gradually as impurities rise to the surface for skimming. 10,000 murex yield approximately 1 gram of pure dye. A single garment requires the sacrifice of countless thousands of creatures, their shells accumulating in middens that grow into artificial hills visible from passing ships. These shell mounds become landmarks, markers of Phoenician industry that archaeologists will excavate 3 millennia hence. The color itself defies simple description. True Tyrian purple shifts between crimson and violet depending on the angle of light, the weave of fabric, the hour of day. Unlike vegetable dyes that fade with washing and sunlight, murex purple deepens and intensifies with age, growing more beautiful through years of wear. This permanence makes the color synonymous with royalty and divine favor across the ancient world. Textile production integrates seamlessly with dye manufacturing. Phoenician weavers work looms strung with wool from Syrian sheep and linen from Egyptian flax. The finest fabrics receive multiple immersions and dye baths of increasing concentration, each layer adding depth and richness to the final color. Lesser grades serve merchants and wealthy households, while the supreme quality clothes kings and adorns temple statues. The economics transform Phoenician society. Purple cloth commands prices equivalent to its weight in silver, sometimes exceeding the value of gold. Tyre establishes monopolistic control over the highest grades, while Sidon specializes in particular shades and techniques. The wealth-generated funds harbor improvements, ship construction, and the colonial ventures that will soon carry Phoenician influence across the entire Mediterranean. Foreign demand proves insatiable. Egyptian priests require purple for temple hangings. Mesopotamian kings drape their thrones in Tyrian cloth. Greek aristocrats display purple borders on their garments as markers of status. The Phoenician cities become essential nodes in a luxury trade network that binds the ancient world together through desire for this single miraculous color. The industry shapes urban geography. Dye workers form distinct communities, their occupation marked permanently on their skin by purple stains that no amount of washing removes. Their neighborhoods cluster near processing facilities, separated from wealthier districts by the persistent odor of their trade. Yet their skills command respect and reasonable wages, for the secrets of consistent dye production pass carefully from master to apprentice. Religious significance accrues to the color itself. Purple becomes associated with Melkart, the great god of Tyre, whose priests wear robes dyed in the deepest shades. The transformation from pale secretion to brilliant purple mirrors divine mysteries of death and rebirth, the snail sacrificing its life to create eternal beauty. The throne passes in Tyre around 969 years before the Common Era, and with it comes a transformation that will reshape the ancient world. Hiram ascends to kingship over an island city already wealthy from purple dye and maritime trade, but his vision extends far beyond the accumulated achievements of his predecessors. Under his rule, Tyre will reach heights of prosperity and influence that later generations will remember as a golden age. The new king inherits a city constrained by its island geography. Tyre occupies 2 rocky outcrops separated from the mainland by a half-mile channel, its population pressing against natural limits. Hiram's first great project addresses this fundamental challenge through engineering audacity. His workers fill the strait between the 2 islands with rubble and stone, creating a single unified landmass. The expanded city rises on this reclaimed ground, its new quarters housing workshops, warehouses, and the growing population that commerce demands. Harbor improvements follow the land reclamation, Hiram constructs two separate ports, one facing north toward Sidon and the Phoenician coast, another opening south toward Egypt and the wider Mediterranean. Massive stone moles extend into the sea, creating protected anchorages where merchant vessels can load and unload regardless of weather. The harbors become the beating heart of Tyrian prosperity, their quays crowded with ships from every known shore. Word of Tyrian wealth and skill reaches the highland kingdom of Israel, where a young monarch named Solomon consolidates power following his father David's death. Solomon's ambitions require resources his landlocked realm cannot provide. He needs timber for construction, skilled craftsmen for complex projects, and access to maritime trade networks. Tyre possesses all three in abundance. The alliance between Hiram and Solomon represents a masterwork of diplomatic calculation. Israel controls overland trade routes connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia, while Tyre commands the sea lanes of the Mediterranean. Together, the two kingdoms can dominate commerce flowing in every direction. Hiram sends cedar logs floated down the coast and hauled overland to Jerusalem. Tyrian craftsmen follow, bringing expertise in stonework, metalworking, and architectural design that Israelite builders lack. The Temple of Jerusalem rises through Phoenician hands. Tyrian architects design its layout according to patterns familiar from coastal sanctuaries. Phoenician metalworkers cast the great bronze pillars that flank its entrance, each standing 18 cubits tall with elaborate capitals of lilywork and pomegranates. The Bronze Sea, a massive basin for ritual purification, emerges from Tyrian foundries, its 12 bronze oxen supporting a vessel holding thousands of gallons. Cedar beams span the temple's interior spaces, their fragrant wood creating an atmosphere of sacred permanence. Tyrian carvers cover walls with cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, their chisels transforming Lebanese timber into divine imagery. Gold overlay, applied by Phoenician craftsmen, catches lamplight and transforms the inner sanctuary into a space of overwhelming splendor. Payment flows back to Tyre in wheat and olive oil, the agricultural surplus of Israelite highlands feeding the island city's population. Solomon eventually cedes 20 Galilean towns to Hiram, though the Tyrian king reportedly finds them disappointing. The exchange reveals the fundamental asymmetry of the relationship, with Phoenician skills commanding premium prices that even a wealthy kingdom struggles to meet. Joint maritime ventures extend the partnership beyond construction projects. Tyrian sailors man ships that Solomon builds at Etzion Geber on the Red Sea, their navigational expertise opening routes to Ophir and its legendary gold. Every 3 years, the combined fleet returns bearing precious metals, ivory, apes, and peacocks, exotic goods that enhance both kingdoms' prestige. Tyre itself transforms under Hiram's building programs. New temples honor Melkart and Astarte, their precincts expanded and enriched with offerings from grateful merchants. The royal palace grows to match the city's enhanced status, its cedar-paneled halls receiving ambassadors from distant lands. Workshops multiply to meet demand for Tyrian goods, their products carrying the island city's reputation across the known world. The shipyards of Tyre never fall silent during the decades following Hiram's reign. Hammers ring against wooden pegs from dawn until dusk, the rhythm of construction echoing across the harbor waters, like a heartbeat that sustains the island city's commercial dominance. Here, in workshops crowded between warehouses and temples, Phoenician shipwrights perfect the vessels that will carry their civilization's influence to the farthest shores of the known world. The cedar descends from Lebanon's heights in great logs, floated down rivers or dragged by ox teams to coastal yards where master craftsmen assess each timber's grain and strength. Only the finest wood earns selection for keel construction, that foundational spine upon which an entire ship's integrity depends. Shipwrights split planks with bronze wedges, shaping them with adzes until they curve to match the hull's intended form. The mortise and tenon joinery that locks these planks together represents generations of accumulated wisdom, each wooden peg driven home with precision that will withstand years of Mediterranean storms. The vessels emerging from these yards bear names that echo through ancient texts. Ships of Tarshish become synonymous with long-distance maritime capability, their broad hulls designed to carry heavy cargoes across open waters to distant western ports. These merchantmen measure perhaps 30 meters in length, their rounded bellies accommodating amphorae of wine, ingots of copper, bolts of purple cloth. A single square sail of woven linen catches the prevailing winds, while banks of oars provide propulsion when breezes fail or harbor approaches demand precise maneuvering. Warships follow different design principles, their hulls narrower and lower, built for speed rather than capacity. The ram emerges as a devastating weapon during this era, a bronze-sheathed projection extending from the bow at waterline level. Phoenician naval architects understand that velocity transforms these rams into hull-crushing instruments, and they design their fighting vessels accordingly. Twin steering oars at the stern allow rapid course corrections during combat, while elevated platforms provide archers with commanding fields of fire. Navigation techniques distinguish Phoenician sailors from all competitors. While other maritime peoples hug coastlines and anchor each night, Tyrian captains venture into open waters, guided by celestial knowledge passed from father to son across generations. The North Star becomes their constant companion on nighttime passages, its fixed position providing directional certainty when no land remains visible. They learn to read the subtle color changes where currents meet, to interpret the flight patterns of birds seeking distant shores, to smell approaching land on winds that carry the scent of vegetation across leagues of empty sea. Sail-making evolves into its own specialized craft. Weavers produce linen canvas of remarkable durability, their looms creating fabric dense enough to capture wind, yet flexible enough to survive sudden gusts. Rope makers twist flax fibers into cordage that secures masts, controls sails, and anchors vessels against harbor currents. Each component of the rigging system reflects careful calculation, the tension and angles optimized through decades of practical experience. The harbor infrastructure supporting this maritime enterprise expands continuously. Stone moles extend into deeper waters, creating protected anchorages where ships can load and unload regardless of weather conditions. Slipways allow vessels to be hauled ashore for hull maintenance, their bottoms scraped clean of barnacles and marine growth that slow passage through the water. Warehouses multiply along the waterfront, their interiors organized to facilitate rapid cargo transfer between arriving and departing vessels. By 850 years before the Common Era, Phoenician maritime technology represents the ancient world's highest achievement in naval architecture and seamanship. These ships connect the tin mines of distant Iberia with the markets of Egypt, the copper deposits of Cyprus with the craftsmen of Mesopotamia. They carry not merely goods but ideas, techniques, and cultural practices across waters that once seemed impassable barriers. The sea becomes a highway rather than an obstacle, and the Phoenicians hold the keys to its mastery. The revolution begins not with conquest or commerce, but with marks scratched into clay. Somewhere in the workshops and counting houses of the Levantine coast, between 1050 and 900 years before the Common Era, scribes accomplish what centuries of civilization have failed to achieve. They reduce the complexity of human speech to 22 simple symbols. The transformation emerges from practical necessity. Egyptian hieroglyphics require years of training, hundreds of distinct signs representing words, syllables, and concepts. Mesopotamian cuneiform demands similar dedication, its wedge-shaped impressions numbering in the hundreds. Only elite scribes master these systems, their knowledge guarded like precious cargo. But Phoenician merchants need something faster, something any trader can learn, something that travels as easily as goods across the sea. The genius lies in radical simplification. Rather than representing whole words or syllables, each Phoenician letter captures a single consonant sound. Aleph for the glottal stop, Beth for the sound of lips pressing together, Gimel for the throat's soft closure. 22 letters prove sufficient to record any word in the Phoenician tongue. A clever merchant can master the system in weeks rather than years. The earliest surviving inscriptions appear on stone sarcophagi and bronze vessels, their angular letters carved with confident strokes. The Ahiram sarcophagus from Byblos, dating to approximately 1,000 years before the Common Era, bears a curse against tomb robbers in letters that would remain readable across millennia. Each character flows into the next, written from right to left in the Semitic fashion, the text running like water, seeking its natural course. Clay tablets multiply in the counting houses of Tyre and Sidon. Merchants record shipments of purple cloth, quantities of cedar timber, weights of copper ingots. The alphabet serves commerce first, its letters tracking debts and credits across the Mediterranean trading network. A factor in distant Carthage can correspond with his principles in Tyre, their communications carried by the same ships that transport their goods. The writing spreads along trade routes like seeds scattered by wind. Greek merchants encounter Phoenician letters in the ports of the eastern Mediterranean. Recognizing their utility for recording their own tongue, they adapt the system, adding symbols for vowel sounds that Phoenician script leaves unwritten. Alpha, beta, gamma emerge from Aleph, Beth, Gimel, the transformation so direct that the very word alphabet preserves its Phoenician origins. Scribal workshops in the harbor cities train new generations in the art of inscription. Young men learn to prepare clay tablets, smoothing the surface with practiced hands before pressing stylus to soft material. They practice letter forms until muscle memory guides their movements, each character emerging with consistent shape and proportion. The most skilled graduate to work on stone and metal, their inscriptions intended to endure beyond the lifetimes of those who commission them. The alphabet democratizes knowledge in ways its inventors never anticipate. When writing requires only 22 symbols rather than hundreds, literacy becomes accessible to merchants, craftsmen, and administrators who lack years for scribal training. Commercial records proliferate. Religious texts find wider audiences. Laws can be posted where citizens read them directly, rather than relying on priestly interpretation. By 800 years before the Common Era, variations of the Phoenician alphabet spread across the ancient world. Aramaic scribes adapt it for their language, creating a script that will eventually reach from Egypt to India. Hebrew writers employ a closely related system for their sacred texts. The letters travel westward to Etruria and Rome, eastward to Arabia and beyond. Every subsequent alphabet of the Western world traces its ancestry to those 22 Phoenician symbols. The revolution proves more lasting than any empire. Armies conquer and retreat. Dynasties rise and crumble. Cities burn and rebuild. But the alphabet endures, carrying human thought across centuries and continents, its Phoenician origins visible in every written word that follows. The ships sail westward as the 9th century before the Common Era unfolds, their cedar hulls cutting through waters no Phoenician vessel has crossed before. What begins as cautious exploration transforms into systematic colonization, a deliberate planting of commercial outposts that will reshape the Mediterranean world. The pattern emerges from necessity and ambition combined. Phoenician merchants require secure harbors where crews can rest, ships can be repaired, and goods can be stored for the long journeys home. They seek locations with natural advantages, protected anchorages, fresh water sources, defensible promontories. Each settlement serves as a link in an expanding chain of commerce stretching ever farther from the Levantine homeland. Cyprus receives the earliest attention, its copper mines drawing Tyrian traders across the relatively short crossing. Settlements take root at Kition and other coastal sites, where Phoenician craftsmen establish workshops producing goods that blend Levantine techniques with local traditions. The island becomes a stepping stone, a proving ground for the colonial enterprise that will soon reach far more distant shores. The North African coast beckons next. Utica rises near the mouth of the Byblos River, its harbor providing access to the fertile agricultural lands of what will become Tunisia. Phoenician settlers negotiate with local populations, establishing trading relationships that benefit both parties. Grain flows eastward to feed the crowded cities of Tyre and Sidon, while manufactured goods travel westward to satisfy African demand. Sicily's western shores witness the founding of Motia, an island settlement connected to the mainland by a causeway. The location proves ideal for controlling trade routes between Africa and Italy. Phoenician merchants establish themselves as intermediaries, their commercial networks linking Greek colonies in the east with indigenous populations throughout the western Mediterranean. Sardinia's mineral wealth attracts sustained attention. Settlements appear at Nora, Sulcis, and Tharos, their populations engaged in extracting and processing the island's copper, lead, and silver. Mining operations require permanent communities, and Phoenician colonists bring their families, their gods, and their cultural practices to these distant shores. The Iberian Peninsula represents the ultimate prize. Gadir rises beyond the Pillars of Hercules, positioned to control access to the Atlantic and the tin routes leading northward to distant Britain. The settlement occupies a cluster of islands at the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, its harbor becoming the western terminus of Phoenician commercial expansion. Silver from the mines of Tartessos flows through Gadir's warehouses, enriching both the local colony and the mother cities thousands of miles to the east. Each colony develops its own character while maintaining connections to the homeland. Temple complexes dedicated to Melkart and Astarte rise in every settlement, their rituals providing spiritual continuity for populations far from ancestral shores. Craftsmen reproduce familiar goods using local materials, creating distinctive regional styles that archaeologists will later identify as markers of Phoenician presence. The colonial network operates through family connections and commercial partnerships. Merchant houses in Tyre maintain agents in distant settlements, their correspondents traveling by ship across the entire Mediterranean basin. Credit arrangements allow goods to move without immediate payment, the trust built over generations enabling commerce on an unprecedented scale. Local populations respond variously to Phoenician presence. Some embrace the opportunities for trade, adopting Phoenician technologies and cultural practices. Others resist, leading to conflicts that colonial settlements must navigate through diplomacy or force. The most successful colonies develop symbiotic relationships with their neighbors, becoming essential nodes in regional exchange networks. By 800 years before the Common Era, Phoenician settlements dot the Mediterranean coastline from Cyprus to the Atlantic. The commercial empire requires no armies of occupation, no provincial governors, no tribute systems. It sustains itself through mutual benefit, through the exchange of goods that enriches all participants. The seeds planted during this century of expansion will grow into something greater still, culminating in the founding of a city that will one day challenge Rome itself for mastery of the ancient world. The legend arrives before the city itself, carried on the lips of sailors and merchants who speak of a princess fleeing murder and betrayal. Around 814 years before the Common Era, ships bearing refugees from Tyre appear along the North African coast, their passengers seeking not trade but sanctuary. Among them travels Elissa, sister to the Tyrian king Pygmalion, who has murdered her husband Aesirbas for his wealth. The Greeks will later call her Dido, and her story will echo through millennia. The refugees make landfall near a Libyan settlement, where the local Berber king Iarbas views these strangers with suspicion. Elissa requests only as much land as an ox hide can encompass. The king agrees, amused by such modest ambition. But Phoenician cunning transforms limitation into opportunity. The princess orders the hide cut into the thinnest possible strips, which, when laid end to end, encircle an entire hilltop overlooking the finest natural harbor on the African coast. The Berbers watch in astonishment as the newcomers claim their new home through wit rather than warfare. The hill they call Bursa rises above a peninsula, jutting into waters that shimmer turquoise beneath the Mediterranean sun. Two natural inlets indent the coastline, offering protection from storms and enemies alike. The refugees recognize immediately what generations of Phoenician sailors have learned to see: the perfect marriage of defensible terrain and maritime access. Here they will build not merely a colony, but a new Tyre, a city that will eventually surpass its mother in power and ambition. Construction begins with the urgency of exiles who cannot return. Limestone quarried from nearby hills rises into walls that trace the peninsula's contours. The settlers bring with them the accumulated knowledge of centuries: how to construct harbors that shelter vessels from winter gales, how to lay streets that channel sea breezes through summer heat, how to build temples that honor the gods who protect sailors and merchants. Melkart receives the first sanctuary, his worship connecting this distant shore to the sacred traditions of Tyre. The harbor planning reveals Phoenician genius at its most practical. The natural inlets begin their transformation into the twin harbors that will make Carthage legendary. The outer commercial port will eventually accommodate hundreds of merchant vessels. The inner circular harbor, still decades from completion, will house the war fleet that protects this growing power. For now, wooden jetties extend into sheltered waters, sufficient for the modest traffic of a young settlement. The surrounding countryside offers resources that Tyre itself lacks. Fertile plains stretch inland, capable of supporting agriculture that island-bound Phoenician cities could never achieve. The Berber populations, initially wary, gradually recognize the benefits of proximity to these skilled traders. Exchange networks develop, linking African interior goods to Mediterranean commerce. Ivory, gold dust, exotic animals, and enslaved people flow toward the coast. Manufactured goods, wine, and oil move inland. Other Phoenician settlements along the African coast acknowledge Carthage's growing prominence. The city's position commands the narrows separating the western and eastern Mediterranean, a geographic advantage that will prove decisive in centuries to come. Ships passing between the two basins find Carthage an essential waypoint, its harbors offering repair, resupply, and the commercial connections that make long-distance trade profitable. The founding generation establishes institutions that will govern Carthage for centuries. Two elected magistrates called suffets share executive authority, preventing the concentration of power that destroyed Alyssa's family in Tyre. A council of elders provides continuity and wisdom. The system balances merchant interests against aristocratic privilege, creating stability that attracts settlers and investment alike. Alyssa herself, according to tradition, meets a tragic end. Pressured by King Byblos to marry him or face war, she chooses death over submission, throwing herself onto a funeral pyre. Her sacrifice becomes founding mythology, transforming a refugee princess into a divine protector. The Carthaginians will honor her memory for generations, her story embodying the determination and cunning that built their city from nothing. By the close of the 9th century before the Common Era, Carthage has established the foundations of empire. The city that began as a refuge for exiles now welcomes ambitious Phoenicians from across the Mediterranean. Its harbors grow busier each season. Its walls extend to encompass expanding populations. Its influence reaches ever further along African and European coasts. The seed planted by a fleeing princess will grow into the power that Rome must destroy to claim mastery of the ancient world. The shadow falls from the east, carried on the boots of Assyrian soldiers and the demands of kings who style themselves rulers of the universe. As the 9th century before the Common Era reaches its midpoint, the great military power of Mesopotamia turns its gaze toward the wealthy cities of the Phoenician coast, and a new era of survival through submission begins. The Assyrian war machine represents something the Phoenician city-states have never confronted. Previous overlords sought trade partnerships and tribute in goods. The Assyrians demand absolute acknowledgement of their supremacy, backed by armies capable of reducing cities to rubble and populations to slavery. Their stone reliefs, carved in palaces at Nimrud and Nineveh, depict the fate of those who resist: impaled bodies, flayed skins, pyramids of severed heads. These images serve as propaganda, warnings transmitted across the ancient world. King Ashurnasirpal II reaches the Mediterranean coast around 867 years before the Common Era. His annals record the tribute received from Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad: silver, gold, tin, bronze vessels, linen garments dyed in purple, ivory, and exotic woods. The Phoenician kings present these offerings not as defeated enemies but as willing partners, a diplomatic fiction that preserves their cities while acknowledging Assyrian supremacy. This calculated submission becomes the Phoenician survival strategy for generations. Unlike inland kingdoms that resist and suffer destruction, the coastal cities recognize that their value lies in their commercial networks, their maritime expertise, their irreplaceable role as intermediaries between East and West. The Assyrians need Phoenician ships, Phoenician sailors, Phoenician access to Mediterranean trade routes. This mutual dependency creates space for negotiation within apparent subjugation. The tribute processions become regular features of Phoenician life. Each year, Caravans assemble bearing the finest products of coastal workshops, purple textiles woven in Tyre, glass vessels blown in Sidon, carved ivory panels from Byblos, cedar timber from mountain slopes. Assyrian officials record these deliveries meticulously, their cuneiform tablets preserving evidence of Phoenician wealth and Assyrian extraction. Yet the Phoenicians adapt, as they always have. The tribute demands, while burdensome, do not destroy their commercial foundations. Merchants simply factor Assyrian payments into their calculations, adjusting prices and expanding trade volumes to compensate. The Western colonies, beyond Assyrian reach, become increasingly important as insurance against Eastern pressures. Carthage and other settlements offer refuge and alternative markets should conditions in the homeland become untenable. The Assyrian presence also brings opportunities. Phoenician craftsmen find employment decorating Assyrian palaces, their ivory carvings and bronze work adorning royal chambers in Nimrud. Phoenician ships transport Assyrian goods and personnel across the Mediterranean. The relationship, though unequal, generates profits alongside obligations. Successive Assyrian monarchs maintain pressure on the coast. Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, and Sennacherib each demand renewed submission and increased tribute. Occasional rebellions flare when Phoenician cities sense Assyrian weakness or find the burdens intolerable. These uprisings invariably end in renewed submission, sometimes accompanied by punitive measures, increased tribute, hostage-taking, installation of Assyrian officials. Tyre proves particularly resilient, its island location providing natural defense that even Assyrian armies cannot easily overcome. When the city resists, Assyrian forces can devastate mainland territories but struggle to assault the fortified island itself. This geographic advantage allows Tyre to negotiate from relative strength, accepting tribute obligations while maintaining greater autonomy than inland cities. The Assyrian period transforms Phoenician society in subtle ways. Political independence becomes a memory, replaced by careful navigation of imperial demands. Yet, cultural identity persists, commercial networks survive, and the essential Phoenician character endures beneath the shadow of foreign domination. The cities learn that survival sometimes requires bending without breaking, that wealth and usefulness can substitute for military power, that empires rise and fall while patient merchants continue their trade. The workshops breathe with fire and patience. Across the Phoenician cities during the centuries between 900 and 600 years, before the Common Era, artisans transform raw materials into objects that will outlast empires, their techniques refined through generations of accumulated knowledge passed from master to apprentice in dimly lit chambers where creativity meets commerce. Glass emerges from the sandy shores as if by magic. The coastal regions near Sidon and Tyre possess silica-rich sands that, when combined with natron and subjected to intense heat, yield a substance both fragile and eternal. Furnaces glow orange and white, temperatures climbing until the mixture liquefies into molten brilliance. Workers gather the glowing mass on iron rods, spinning and shaping while the material remains pliable. They create vessels of translucent blue and green, small containers for precious oils and cosmetics that wealthy Egyptians and Mesopotamians prize above silver. The technique of core forming allows artisans to wrap molten glass around clay cores, building up layers of color before the core is scraped away, leaving hollow vessels of impossible delicacy. Ivory arrives from African trade routes, elephant tusks carried northward through networks that connect Phoenician merchants to distant hunting grounds. In workshops throughout Tyre and Sidon, carvers transform this precious material into furniture inlays, cosmetic boxes, and decorative panels that adorn palaces from Assyria to Egypt. The craftsmen work with bronze tools and infinite patience, cutting intricate scenes of sphinxes, lotus flowers, and sacred trees into surfaces no larger than a human palm. These carvings blend Egyptian motifs with Mesopotamian themes and distinctly Phoenician innovations, creating a visual language that speaks to multiple cultures simultaneously. Bronze workshops fill entire districts with the sounds of hammering and the acrid smell of molten metal. Phoenician metalworkers master the precise ratios of copper and tin that produce the strongest alloys, their knowledge accumulated through centuries of experimentation. They cast ritual bowls decorated with concentric bands of marching figures, warriors and chariots, and mythological creatures parading around gleaming surfaces. They forge weapons for foreign armies, tools for distant farmers, and decorative objects for royal treasuries across the known world. The production of these luxury goods requires sophisticated organization. Raw materials flow inward from trading networks spanning 3 continents. Copper arrives from Cyprus, tin from distant Atlantic sources, ivory from Africa, precious stones from Arabia. Master craftsmen supervise workshops where specialized laborers handle different stages of production. Quality control ensures that Phoenician goods maintain the reputation that commands premium prices in foreign markets. These artisans work under Assyrian domination, yet their products travel freely across imperial boundaries. Assyrian kings themselves commission Phoenician craftsmen to decorate their palaces, recognizing skills that no amount of military conquest can replicate. The tribute demanded by Eastern empires often takes the form of finished luxury goods rather than raw materials, acknowledging that Phoenician craftsmanship adds value beyond the worth of base substances. Workshop districts cluster near harbors where finished goods can be loaded directly onto waiting ships. The organization resembles early industrial production, with different specialists handling distinct phases of manufacture. Some workers prepare raw materials, others handle the dangerous processes involving fire and molten substances. Still others apply the final decorative touches that distinguish Phoenician work from inferior imitations. The objects themselves carry Phoenician influence across the ancient world. A bronze bowl discovered in an Etruscan tomb, an ivory panel decorating an Assyrian throne room, a glass vessel buried with an Egyptian noble. Each artifact extends Phoenician cultural reach far beyond the narrow coastal homeland. These artisans create not merely objects, but ambassadors of taste and technique, silent teachers whose work instructs foreign craftsmen in methods developed along the Levantine shore. The sacred spaces rise above the harbor cities, their limestone walls catching the Mediterranean light as incense smoke curls toward heavens, where storm gods gather their thunder. Between 1,000 and 500 years before the Common Era, Phoenician religious life reaches its fullest expression, a complex tapestry of deities, rituals, and architectural devotion that shapes every aspect of existence along the Levantine coast. Baal Shamem, Lord of the Heavens, commands the storms that determine whether ships return safely or vanish beneath angry waves. His temples dominate the highest points of each city, their courtyards open to the sky so that worshippers might witness the very clouds their god commands. At Byblos, the great temple complex spreads across terraced platforms, its inner sanctuary housing a sacred stone believed to have fallen from the heavens themselves. Priests in linen robes tend eternal flames, while bronze vessels catch the blood of sacrificial offerings. Astarte, goddess of love, fertility, and war, receives devotion in sanctuaries fragrant with myrrh and decorated with ivory plaques depicting her many aspects. Her temples at Sidon feature sacred pools where ritual purification precedes worship, their waters reflecting torchlight during nocturnal ceremonies. Female attendants serve her cult, their roles ranging from priestesses who interpret divine will to musicians whose songs accompany the great festivals marking seasonal transitions. Melkart, the city god of Tyre, embodies the Phoenician spirit of maritime adventure and commercial success. His great temple, rebuilt and expanded across generations, features twin pillars of gold and emerald that ancient writers describe with wonder. Each spring, elaborate ceremonies celebrate his death and resurrection, a cycle mirroring the agricultural year and the eternal return of trading fleets from distant shores. The sacred fire burning perpetually in his sanctuary must never be extinguished, tended by priests who inherit their positions through family lineages stretching back centuries. Temple architecture reflects both local traditions and foreign influences absorbed through centuries of trade. Courtyards paved with limestone lead to covered halls supported by cedar columns, their capitals carved with lotus and papyrus motifs borrowed from Egyptian models. Inner sanctuaries remain small and dark, accessible only to priests who enter bearing offerings on behalf of the community. Rooftop altars allow sacrifices under open sky, the smoke rising as visible prayers ascending toward divine attention. Ritual objects fill these sacred spaces with meaning. Bronze incense burners shaped like hands reach upward in eternal supplication. Terracotta figurines represent worshippers, frozen in perpetual devotion, left as proxies when living petitioners cannot remain. Carved ivory panels depicting divine figures decorate sanctuary walls, their surfaces once bright with paint and gold leaf. Stone stelae record vows fulfilled and divine favors received, their inscriptions preserving individual voices across millennia. The religious calendar structures urban life around festivals honoring different deities. Spring brings celebrations of renewal. Summer marks maritime departures blessed by Melkart. Autumn harvests require thanksgiving to agricultural gods. Winter solstice ceremonies acknowledge the cosmic struggle between light and darkness. Each city maintains its own sacred calendar, though major festivals draw pilgrims from across the Phoenician world and beyond. Sacred groves outside city walls provide alternative worship spaces where nature itself becomes temple. Ancient trees, some centuries old, shelter small shrines where travelers pause before journeys or give thanks upon safe return. Springs bubbling from rocky hillsides receive offerings tossed into their depths. The water itself, considered divine gift, requiring reciprocal devotion. The relationship between commerce and religion remains inseparable. Merchants dedicate portions of successful voyages to temple treasuries, their gifts recorded on bronze tablets displayed in sanctuary courtyards. Temple complexes themselves function as economic institutions, their priests managing agricultural lands, lending capital for trading ventures, and storing valuables in sacred precincts protected by divine sanction against theft. The streets awaken before dawn, their packed earth surfaces still cool beneath the feet of bakers and water carriers who move through darkness toward their daily labors. Between 800 and 600 years before the Common Era, the Phoenician harbor cities pulse with rhythms shaped by commerce, family, and the eternal presence of the sea. Life here unfolds in narrow lanes, where limestone walls rise 3 and 4 stories high, their upper floors jutting outward to create shadowed passages below, where neighbors can nearly touch hands across the divide. The residential quarters cluster behind the commercial waterfront, their organization reflecting both practical necessity and social hierarchy. Wealthy merchant families occupy compounds near the harbors, their homes built around central courtyards, where light filters through to illuminate mosaic floors and plastered walls painted with geometric patterns. These households contain multiple generations living under patriarchal authority, with grandparents, parents, children, and servants sharing spaces organized around the courtyard's central cistern. Domestic architecture reveals sophisticated understanding of Mediterranean climate. Thick walls of limestone and mud brick provide insulation against summer heat and winter chill. Windows remain small on lower floors for security, expanding on upper levels where wooden shutters control light and airflow. Flat rooftops serve as additional living space where families sleep during hot months. Their reed mats spread beneath stars that guide their ships across distant waters. The morning markets transform harbor-adjacent plazas into theaters of exchange. Fishermen arrive first, their catches still glistening with seawater, laid out on stone slabs where housewives and servants gather to select the freshest specimens. Vegetable sellers follow, their donkeys laden with produce from gardens irrigated by careful water management in the hills behind the cities. Bread vendors carry trays of flatbreads baked in communal ovens, their yeasty fragrance mixing with salt air and fish scales. Social stratification shapes every interaction. The merchant aristocracy controls overseas trade, their wealth measured in ships, warehouses, and distant partnerships. Below them stand shopkeepers and master craftsmen who own their workshops and employ journeymen and apprentices. Free laborers work the docks, their muscles loading and unloading cargoes that connect these narrow streets to the wider Mediterranean world. Slaves, acquired through trade and debt, perform domestic service and heavy labor, their status varying from trusted household members to expendable dock workers. Women's lives center on domestic management, yet Phoenician society grants them greater autonomy than many neighboring cultures. They control household finances, manage servants, and participate in family business decisions. Some widows continue their husbands' trading operations, their names appearing on commercial documents alongside male merchants. Religious roles offer additional avenues for female authority, with priestesses serving Astarte and other goddesses in temple hierarchies, paralleling male religious structures. Children learn their futures early. Sons of merchants accompany fathers to warehouses and ships, absorbing commercial knowledge through observation and gradual participation. Craftsmen's sons enter workshops as apprentices, their small hands learning techniques that will define their adult lives. Daughters master domestic arts under maternal guidance, their education preparing them for marriages that will forge alliances between trading families. The afternoon heat drives activity indoors, where families share meals of bread, olives, cheese, and fish. Wine mixed with water accompanies these gatherings, the beverage stored in amphorae produced by local potters. Evening brings relief as sea breezes cool the streets, drawing residents onto rooftops and into courtyards where conversation and music fill the purple twilight. Public spaces serve multiple functions beyond commerce. Fountains fed by aqueducts provide gathering points where news spreads through casual conversation. Bathhouses offer hygiene and socialization, their heated rooms and cold plunges serving as informal meeting places where business arrangements take shape alongside personal grooming. Taverns near the harbor cater to sailors and travelers, their interiors smoky with oil lamps and loud with languages from across the known world. The rhythm continues through seasons marked by agricultural cycles and sailing schedules. Winter storms close the shipping lanes, concentrating population within city walls where craftsmen work their trades and merchants plan spring ventures. Summer opens the sea roads, drawing men toward distant shores, while women maintain households and manage local affairs. This annual pulse shapes family life, creating patterns of absence and reunion that define Phoenician domestic experience across generations. The horizon stretches beyond familiar waters, beyond the comfortable trading routes that connect Phoenician harbors to Greek islands and Egyptian ports. Between 700 and 500 years before the Common Era, Phoenician vessels pushed through the narrow strait where the Mediterranean meets the endless Atlantic, passing the great rocky promontories that ancient mariners call the Pillars of Melkart. Beyond lies an ocean that swallows ships whole, where currents run unpredictably, and storms arrive without the warning signs Mediterranean sailors have learned to read across generations. The tin routes draw them westward first. Bronze requires copper and tin in careful proportion, and while copper flows abundantly from Cyprus, tin remains precious and distant. Phoenician captains learn that the metal emerges from mines in the far northwest, in lands the Greeks will later call the Cassiderides, the Tin Islands. The journey requires weeks of coastal sailing, hugging the Iberian shore before striking north across open water toward fog-shrouded coasts, where Celtic peoples extract ore from ancient hills. Trading posts emerge along these routes, small settlements where Phoenician merchants maintain permanent presence, exchanging Mediterranean luxuries for raw metal that will feed bronze workshops from Tyre to Carthage. The ships themselves evolve for Atlantic conditions. Hulls grow deeper and broader, designed to ride swells that dwarf Mediterranean waves. Sails expand to catch winds that blow with unfamiliar patterns. Crews develop new navigation techniques, reading Atlantic stars and learning to recognize the subtle color changes where currents meet, where shallow waters give way to oceanic depths. These vessels carry amphoras of wine and oil, bolts of purple cloth, glass beads and bronze implements, returning laden with tin ingots, amber from northern shores, and gold dust traded through intermediaries who control access to African sources. The African circumnavigation represents the most ambitious venture. Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, ruling around 600 years before the Common Era, commissions Phoenician sailors to attempt what no fleet has accomplished: a complete circuit of the African continent. The expedition departs from the Red Sea, sailing southward along coasts that grow increasingly unfamiliar. Months pass as the ships follow the African shore, pausing to plant grain when provisions run low, waiting for harvests before continuing their journey. The sun crosses to the northern sky as they round the continent's southern reaches, a phenomenon the sailors report with wonder upon their return. 3 years after departure, The fleet enters the Mediterranean through the Pillars, completing a voyage that will not be repeated for 2,000 years. Closer to home, Phoenician explorers chart the African Atlantic coast, establishing trading relationships with peoples who control access to gold, ivory, and exotic goods. The settlement at Lixus, near the mouth of a river on the Moroccan coast, serves as a base for expeditions that probe southward along shores where desert meets ocean. Carthaginian Admiral Hanno leads a colonizing expedition around 500 years before the Common Era, founding settlements and documenting encounters with unfamiliar peoples and landscapes. His account describes volcanic mountains glowing at night, rivers filled with crocodiles, and coastal peoples who communicate through drums across vast distances. The Atlantic ventures transform Phoenician commerce and knowledge. Maps expand to include coastlines unknown to other Mediterranean peoples. Trade networks extend to encompass resources unavailable through eastern routes. The tin that flows from northwestern Europe ensures Phoenician dominance in bronze production, even as other civilizations struggle to secure supplies. Gold from African sources enriches Carthaginian treasuries and funds the military expansion that will eventually challenge Greek and Roman power in the western Mediterranean. These distant voyages remain closely guarded secrets. Phoenician captains deliberately spread false information about Atlantic dangers, exaggerating storms and monsters to discourage competitors from following their routes. The knowledge of currents, safe harbors, and trading contacts passes from father to son, from experienced captain to trusted apprentice, never committed to written records that might fall into rival hands. This secrecy preserves Phoenician commercial advantages for centuries, ensuring that the wealth of distant shores flows primarily through their harbors and enriches their cities, while competitors remain confined to familiar waters. The storm gathers from Mesopotamia, carried westward by an army that has already swallowed Jerusalem and scattered its people into exile. Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, turns his attention toward the island fortress of Tyre in the year 586 before the Common Era, initiating a siege that will test the limits of both Babylonian patience and Phoenician resilience across 13 grueling years. The Babylonian forces mass along the mainland shore, their tents spreading across the coastal plain like a dark tide. Siege engines roll forward, their wooden frames creaking under the weight of bronze-tipped rams designed to shatter city walls. Engineers survey the narrow strait separating Tyre's island citadel from the continent, calculating distances and depths while soldiers establish permanent encampments. The army that conquered Egypt's borders and crushed Judean resistance now faces an enemy it cannot reach by conventional means. Tyre's island position proves its greatest defense. Half a mile of open water separates the city from the mainland, too deep for siege towers, too wide for effective bombardment. The Babylonians control the coastal settlements, cutting off mainland resources and capturing the freshwater springs that once supplied the island. Yet, Tyre's harbor remains open to the sea, and Phoenician ships continue arriving with grain from Egypt, timber from distant colonies, and fresh water collected from coastal springs beyond Babylonian reach. The siege settles into a war of attrition. Babylonian soldiers watch helplessly as merchant vessels slip past their positions, their cargoes sustaining a city they cannot touch. Engineers attempt to construct causeways, piling stones and rubble into the strait, but currents sweep away their work, and Tyrian ships harry the construction crews with arrows and burning pitch. The island's walls rise sheer from the water, their limestone blocks fitted so precisely that no scaling ladder can find purchase. Years pass in grinding stalemate. The Babylonian army rotates troops, replacing exhausted units with fresh soldiers while maintaining constant pressure on the mainland approaches. Tyre's satellite communities fall one by one, their populations scattered or enslaved, their workshops and warehouses stripped of valuables. The mainland portion of the city, called Ushu, surrenders early in the siege, its inhabitants fleeing to the island or accepting Babylonian terms. The island endures through careful rationing and maritime supply. Cisterns carved deep into bedrock store rainwater, collected during winter storms. Underground channels distribute this precious resource to households and workshops. The population contracts as non-essential residents evacuate to colonies in Cyprus, North Africa, and the Western Mediterranean. Those who remain are sailors, soldiers, craftsmen, and merchants whose skills sustain the city's defense and commerce. Tyrian diplomacy works alongside military resistance. Envoys travel to Egypt, seeking alliance against the common Babylonian threat. Messages reach Phoenician colonies requesting supplies and reinforcements. The city's wealth, accumulated through centuries of trade, purchases mercenaries and provisions while funding diplomatic initiatives across the Mediterranean world. Gold and silver flow outward even as the siege tightens, buying time and allies. The 13th year brings exhaustion to both sides. Nebuchadnezzar's army has consumed vast resources maintaining the siege, resources that might have funded campaigns elsewhere. Tyre's population has dwindled, its economy contracted, its once thriving harbor reduced to a supply lifeline. Neither side can claim victory, yet neither can afford continued stalemate. The settlement that finally emerges reflects this mutual exhaustion. Tyre acknowledges Babylonian suzerainty, accepting a resident commissioner and agreeing to tribute payments. In exchange, the city retains its walls, its government, its trading privileges. The Babylonians gain nominal submission and regular payments without the satisfaction of conquest. Tyrian merchants resume their voyages, now carrying Babylonian diplomatic correspondence alongside their traditional cargoes. The siege leaves permanent scars on the Phoenician world. Mainland communities never fully recover their former prosperity. The balance of power shifts westward toward Carthage and the colonial cities that escaped Babylonian reach. Yet, Tyre itself survives, its island fortress unbreached, its commercial networks damaged but intact, its reputation for resilience enhanced among Mediterranean peoples who witnessed Babylonian armies humbled by waves and walls. The Persian horsemen arrive not as conquerors, but as liberators, their banners promising freedom from Babylonian tribute and respect for ancient traditions. When Cyrus the Great's forces sweep through the Levantine coast in 539 before Christ, Phoenician cities open their gates willingly, trading one imperial master for another who offers far more generous terms. This calculated submission marks the beginning of a partnership that will reshape Mediterranean power for nearly 2 centuries. The Persian administrative genius reveals itself immediately in the treatment of their new maritime subjects. Rather than imposing governors and garrisons, the great king divides the Phoenician coast into 4 autonomous kingdoms centered on Sidon, Tyre, Byblos, and Arwad. Each city retains its hereditary monarchy, its religious institutions, its commercial privileges. Persian satraps oversee broader regional affairs but rarely interfere with internal governance. The arrangement recognizes a fundamental truth that Babylonian siege warfare failed to grasp. Phoenician value lies not in conquered territory, but in willing expertise. The harbors transform into construction yards of unprecedented scale. Persian gold flows into shipyards where Sidonian and Tyrian craftsmen build the warships that will carry imperial ambitions across the Mediterranean. The trireme design reaches perfection under Phoenician hands. 3 banks of oars propelling vessels of extraordinary speed and maneuverability. Cedar planking, copper-sheathed rams, and precisely balanced hulls create weapons that no other Mediterranean power can match in quality or quantity. The royal court at Persepolis welcomes Phoenician kings as honored guests rather than humiliated vassals. Carved reliefs on palace walls depict Sidonian and Tyrian delegations bearing tribute, but the artistic program emphasizes partnership rather than subjugation. Phoenician craftsmen work alongside Persian, Egyptian, and Greek artisans in decorating the great audience halls. Their metalworking techniques, their glass vessels, their purple textiles adorn the chambers where the King of Kings receives ambassadors from every corner of the known world. Naval campaigns reveal the true value of this partnership. When Cambyses marches against Egypt in 525 before Christ, Phoenician fleets transport his armies and supplies across waters that would otherwise prove impassable. The conquest of Egypt opens new trading opportunities, and Phoenician merchants establish themselves in Nile Delta ports with Persian protection. When Darius I launches his Scythian expedition, Phoenician engineers construct the bridge of boats across the Bosphorus that carries his army into Europe. The Persian wars against Greece bring Phoenician seamanship to its ultimate test. At Salamis in 480 before Christ, the combined fleet includes hundreds of Phoenician vessels forming the core of Persian naval power. The narrow straits favor Greek tactics, and the battle ends in Persian defeat, but Phoenician crews fight with distinction. Their reputation for maritime excellence survives the strategic failure of their imperial masters. The administrative systems grow more sophisticated through generations of cooperation. Phoenician cities mint their own coinage bearing local symbols alongside Persian royal imagery. Trade routes extend eastward into the heart of the empire, carrying Mediterranean goods to Babylon, Susa, and beyond. Aramaic becomes the common language of commerce and diplomacy, but Phoenician scripts continue recording local transactions and religious dedications. Sidon emerges as the preeminent Phoenician city under Persian rule, its kings enjoying particular favor at court. The Sidonian fleet receives pride of place in imperial naval reviews. Sidonian craftsmen create the sarcophagi that will house Persian-era kings in elaborate tombs blending Egyptian, Greek, and local artistic traditions. The city's prosperity attracts artisans and merchants from across the Mediterranean world. Yet, tensions simmer beneath the surface of partnership. Persian demands for ships and crews drain Phoenician resources during prolonged campaigns. The Great Revolt of 351 before Christ sees Sidon rise against Persian authority, only to face devastating retribution. The city burns, its population scattered, its brief independence crushed beneath imperial vengeance. The destruction serves as warning to other cities contemplating resistance. The partnership endures despite such episodes, both parties recognizing mutual dependence. Persia needs Phoenician ships to project power across the Mediterranean. Phoenicia needs Persian protection against Greek expansion and commercial competition. This symbiosis creates 2 centuries of relative stability and prosperity, the longest period of peace the Levantine coast has known since the Bronze Age collapse. The arrangement will persist until a young Macedonian king arrives with ambitions that neither partner can survive. The Western Mediterranean awakens to a new power, one that has grown from colonial outpost to commercial empire, while its mother cities bend beneath Persian authority. Carthage, founded 2.5 centuries earlier by refugees from Tyre, now commands territories and trade routes that dwarf anything the Levantine homeland ever possessed. The daughter has surpassed the mother. The twin harbors of Carthage anchor this transformation. The rectangular commercial port receives merchant vessels from every shore, their holds heavy with African gold, Spanish silver, Sardinian grain, and Sicilian timber. The circular military harbor, hidden behind the commercial basin, shelters a fleet of warships arranged in covered docks radiating from a central island command post. From this island, admirals survey their vessels and plan campaigns that will determine Mediterranean supremacy. The Carthaginian commercial network stretches from the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Iberia to the central Mediterranean islands. Trading posts dot the North African coastline, each contributing grain, hides, and slaves to the metropolitan economy. Spanish colonies provide silver and tin, metals essential for bronze production and monetary exchange. Sardinian and Sicilian outposts secure grain supplies and strategic positions against Greek competition. Sicily becomes the perpetual battleground. Greek colonies occupy the eastern portion of the island, their temples and theaters proclaiming Hellenic civilization. Carthaginian settlements control the western reaches, their harbors and warehouses serving commercial rather than cultural ambitions. Between these spheres, warfare erupts repeatedly across the 5th and 4th centuries before Christ. The Carthaginian military evolves to meet these challenges. Unlike the merchant marines of the Levantine cities, Carthage develops professional armies drawn from subject peoples and mercenary contracts. Libyan infantry provides disciplined foot soldiers. Numidian cavalry contributes mobile striking power. Balearic slingers offer range support. Spanish and Celtic warriors add ferocity and numbers. Carthaginian citizens command but rarely fight, their wealth purchasing the blood of others. The Tophet sanctuary reveals darker aspects of Carthaginian religion. Within this sacred precinct, urns containing cremated remains rest beneath carved stelae, their inscriptions recording dedications to Baal Hammon and Tanit. Ancient sources describe child sacrifice, though modern scholars debate whether these burials represent ritual killing or natural infant mortality given sacred treatment. The precinct expands steadily across centuries, its thousands of urns testifying to practices that horrified Greek and Roman observers. African expansion proceeds alongside Mediterranean competition. Carthaginian expeditions probe southward along the Atlantic coast, establishing trading posts and seeking gold sources. The voyage of Hanno, recorded in Greek translation, describes encounters with gorillas and volcanic mountains, suggesting penetration deep into tropical waters. Eastward, Carthaginian influence extends along the North African coast toward Cyrenaica, though Greek colonies there limit expansion. The commercial empire operates through sophisticated mechanisms. Treaties with Rome, preserved in later historical accounts, reveal careful territorial demarcation and trading regulations. Carthaginian merchants enjoy exclusive access to certain regions while accepting restrictions elsewhere. Silver coinage facilitates transactions, though barter remains common in peripheral exchanges. Urban Carthage grows magnificent. The Birza Hill, legendary site of Dido's original settlement, supports temples and public buildings overlooking the harbors below. Residential quarters spread across surrounding slopes, their multi-story houses featuring cisterns, courtyards, and plastered walls. Population estimates suggest several 100,000 inhabitants at the city's peak, making Carthage among the largest cities of the ancient Mediterranean. The agricultural hinterland sustains this population. Carthaginian landowners develop intensive farming techniques, their estates producing grain, olives, wine, and livestock. Agricultural treatises, later translated into Latin by Roman conquerors, codify this expertise. Irrigation systems and crop rotation maximize yields for North African soils. This Western Phoenician power reaches its zenith as the 4th century before Christ advances, its fleets commanding sea lanes, its armies contesting Sicily, its merchants trading across 3 continents. Yet eastward, a young Macedonian king prepares campaigns that will reshape the entire Mediterranean world, beginning with the Phoenician homeland that Carthage has long since surpassed. The young Macedonian king arrives at the Phoenician coast in the winter of 332 before Christ, his army fresh from victories at Granicus and Issus, the Persian Empire crumbling before his advance. City after city along the Levantine shore opens its gates. Byblos submits. Sidon welcomes him as liberator from Persian rule. But Tyre, the island fortress that has defied empires for centuries, refuses to bend. The city rises half a mile offshore, its walls climbing directly from the sea, its twin harbors protected by massive stone breakwaters. No army has ever breached these defenses. The Babylonians besieged for 13 years and achieved only partial submission. The Tyrians believe their island sanctuary remains impregnable, their fleet capable of maintaining supply lines indefinitely. Alexander demands entry to sacrifice at the temple of Melkart, whom Greeks identify with Heracles. The Tyrians offer compromise. He may worship at the mainland shrine of Old Tyre. The king recognizes this diplomatic deflection for what it represents: refusal to acknowledge his sovereignty. The siege begins. The Macedonian engineers face an unprecedented challenge. No siege towers can approach walls surrounded by water. No battering rams can reach gates accessible only by ship. Alexander conceives a solution that transforms geography itself: a causeway stretching from the mainland to the island, wide enough for siege equipment, strong enough to support his army. Construction begins with rubble from Old Tyre, the abandoned mainland settlement providing initial material. Workers drive wooden pilings into the seabed, filling the framework with stones, debris, and earth. The causeway advances slowly through shallow waters near shore, where laborers work waist-deep in the Mediterranean. Tyrian warships harass the construction constantly. Archers rain arrows upon exposed workers. Fire ships drift toward the wooden framework. The defenders understand that each day of delay strengthens their position, that winter storms might scatter the Macedonian fleet, that Persian reinforcements might yet arrive. Alexander responds with floating screens to protect his workers, with towers mounted on the causeway's advancing end, with artillery that drives Tyrian ships beyond effective range. The construction pushes forward through spring, the mole growing longer as it approaches deeper water, where progress slows dramatically. The Tyrians launch their most devastating attack using a converted horse transport. They fill the vessel with combustible materials, weight the stern to raise the bow, and sail directly at the causeway towers. The fire ship strikes, flames engulf the siege equipment, and Tyrian marines pour from following boats to attack workers and destroy construction. The setback proves temporary. Alexander orders the causeway widened, more towers constructed, and his engineers develop countermeasures against future fire attacks. Meanwhile, the king assembles a fleet from submitted Phoenician cities. Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad provide ships whose crews know Tyrian waters intimately. The naval balance shifts decisively. Carthage, Tyre's greatest colony, sends no relief fleet despite desperate appeals. The Tyrians find themselves blockaded, their legendary seamanship neutralized by overwhelming numbers and the bitter irony of Phoenician ships serving a foreign conqueror. The causeway reaches the island walls by midsummer. Siege towers roll forward on the completed mole, while ships carrying battering rams assault the seaward fortifications. The Tyrians defend with extraordinary courage, dropping heated sand on attackers, cutting anchor cables of assault ships, fighting from walls that have never known enemy feet. The breach comes on the southern wall, where naval rams have weakened the foundations. Macedonian soldiers pour through, meeting resistance at every street corner, every rooftop, every temple precinct. The fighting continues for hours as the city falls block by block. The aftermath reflects Alexander's fury at prolonged resistance. 8,000 Tyrians die in the assault and subsequent massacre. 30,000 survivors face enslavement. The king crucifies 2,000 military-age men along the shore, a brutal message to any city contemplating similar defiance. The causeway remains, permanently joining island to mainland, transforming Tyre's geography forever. Silt accumulates against the structure over subsequent centuries, widening it into the peninsula that exists today. The island fortress that defied empires becomes a coastal promontory, its strategic advantage erased by the very siege that conquered it. The dust settles over Tyre's broken walls, and a new era begins. Greek becomes the language of commerce, of administration, of aspiration. Within a generation, the children of purple merchants learn to speak in Attic phrases, to write their accounts in Greek letters derived from the very alphabet their ancestors created. The transformation unfolds gradually, like dye spreading through cloth. Macedonian governors establish themselves in the ancient harbor cities, but they rule through accommodation rather than erasure. Phoenician merchants remain essential to Mediterranean trade, their knowledge of distant ports and seasonal winds irreplaceable. The conquerors need the conquered, and this mutual dependence shapes the centuries that follow. Tyre rebuilds upon its ruins, the causeway now a permanent feature connecting the former island to the mainland. New temples rise alongside ancient sanctuaries, their columns reflecting Greek proportions while housing Phoenician deities. Melkart becomes identified with Heracles, the divine hero whose labors mirror the god's own mythology. Astarte merges with Aphrodite, her worship continuing under a Greek name. The gods survive by adapting, as their people have always done. Sidon flourishes under Hellenistic rule, its glass workshops producing vessels that combine Phoenician technique with Greek aesthetic sensibilities. The city's sarcophagi display this cultural fusion most dramatically. Carved limestone coffins depicting their occupants in Greek dress while bearing Phoenician inscriptions. Identity becomes layered, multiple affiliations coexisting within single families. Byblos maintains its ancient prestige as a sacred city. its temples to Baalat Gebal, attracting pilgrims who now arrive speaking Greek. The papyrus trade continues, the city's name forever linked to the material that carries written knowledge across the Mediterranean world. Greek scholars visit to study Phoenician religious traditions, seeking ancient wisdom in the temples of the coast. The Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and the Seleucid rulers in Syria compete for control of the Phoenician coast, and the cities navigate between these powers with characteristic diplomatic skill. Tribute flows to whichever empire currently dominates, while commerce continues regardless of political boundaries. The harbor cities have survived Assyrian demands, Babylonian sieges, and Persian incorporation. Greek rule represents merely the latest accommodation, yet something essential begins to fade. The distinctive Phoenician script, once carried by merchants to every Mediterranean shore, gradually yields to Greek letters and public inscriptions. By the 2nd century before Christ, even religious texts increasingly appear in Greek translation. The language of Hiram and Jezebel retreats into domestic spaces, into traditional rituals, into the memories of elderly priests who remember the old ways. The Western colonies follow their own trajectory. Carthage, unconquered by Alexander, maintains Phoenician traditions more purely than the mother cities. The Punic language thrives in North Africa, in Spain, in Sicily, carrying forward the sounds and structures that the Levantine coast is slowly forgetting. The colonial periphery becomes the cultural heartland, preserving what the center abandons. Hellenistic Tyre produces philosophers who write in Greek, merchants who negotiate in multiple languages, craftsmen who blend traditions into new forms. The city remains prosperous, its purple dye still commanding premium prices, its ships still crossing familiar routes. But the crews increasingly speak Greek, the cargo manifests are written in Greek letters, and the gods receive offerings accompanied by Greek prayers. The transformation is neither conquest nor surrender, but something more subtle. Phoenician identity does not disappear, but dissolves into a broader Mediterranean culture, contributing essential elements while losing its distinct boundaries. The alphabet spreads further than ever, now carried by Greek colonists and Roman administrators, but few remember its Levantine origins. Temple archives preserve ancient rituals, but fewer young priests learn to read the old inscriptions. Merchant families maintain traditional practices at home while presenting Greek faces to the wider world. The purple dye continues to symbolize royalty, but the Murex fishermen who harvest the shells increasingly identify as Greek subjects rather than Phoenician heirs. This twilight stretches across 2 centuries, a gradual dimming rather than sudden darkness. The cities endure, the harbors function, the trade routes remain active, but the civilization that invented the alphabet, that mastered the seas, that connected the ancient world through commerce and culture, slowly merges into something larger, something that will remember only fragments of what came before. The Western Mediterranean transforms into a battlefield where 2 civilizations collide, each convinced that only one can survive. Rome, the rising power of the Italian peninsula, looks southward across the narrow strait separating Sicily from Africa, where Carthage commands the richest trading empire the ancient world has ever known. The conflict that erupts in 264 before Christ will span more than a century and 3 devastating wars. The First Punic War begins over Sicily, that fertile island positioned between 2 hungry powers. Rome possesses no navy worthy of the name, yet within months, Roman engineers study a captured Carthaginian warship and construct an entire fleet. They add a revolutionary boarding bridge called the Corvus, transforming naval combat into something resembling land warfare. Carthaginian admirals, masters of maritime maneuver for generations, suddenly find Roman soldiers storming across their decks. The war grinds on for 23 years, consuming fleets and armies on both sides. Storms destroy Roman squadrons. Carthaginian mercenaries bleed across Sicilian hillsides. When peace finally arrives in 241 before Christ, Carthage surrenders Sicily and pays crushing indemnities. The Western Phoenician Empire, undefeated in direct battle, has lost through attrition what it could not lose through combat. Carthage rebuilds in Spain, where the Barcid family carves out new territories rich in silver and soldiers. Hamilcar, then his son-in-law, Hasdrubal, and finally his son Hannibal, transform Iberia into a base for revenge. The young Hannibal, raised on hatred of Rome, prepares the most audacious military campaign in ancient history. In 218 before Christ, Hannibal marches from Spain with nearly 90,000 men and 37 war elephants. He crosses the Pyrenees, the Rhone River, and then the impossible Alps themselves. The mountain passage claims half his army and most of his elephants, yet the survivors descend into Italy as the most dangerous force Rome has ever faced. For 15 years, Hannibal ravages the Italian peninsula. At Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most devastatingly at Cannae, he destroys Roman armies through tactical genius that military academies still study today. Cannae alone claims perhaps 50,000 Roman dead in a single afternoon of encirclement and slaughter. Yet Rome refuses surrender, raising new legions from a seemingly inexhaustible population. The war shifts when Rome produces its own genius. Scipio, later called Africanus, carries the conflict to Spain, then to Africa itself. Carthage recalls Hannibal from Italy to defend the homeland. At Zama in 202 before Christ, the two greatest generals of their age meet. Roman cavalry, allied with Numidian horsemen, encircles the Carthaginian army. Hannibal, undefeated for 16 years, finally falls. The peace strips Carthage of its empire, its fleet, and its military independence. Yet the city rebuilds once more, its commercial genius generating wealth that alarms Roman senators. Cato the Elder ends every speech, regardless of topic, with the same words: Carthage must be destroyed. The Third Punic War begins in 149 before Christ, a conflict designed not for victory, but for annihilation. Roman armies besiege the city for 3 years. When the walls finally fall in 146 before Christ, the legions spend 17 days burning and demolishing. The population faces death or slavery. Ancient tradition claims the Romans salted the earth, though this may be legend. The flames consume libraries, temples, and archives. The twin harbors that once sheltered the mightiest fleet in the Western Sea fill with rubble. The Tophet, where generations offered sacrifices to Baal Hammon, falls silent forever. A civilization that carried Phoenician culture across half the known world vanishes into ash and memory. Yet from those ashes, something indestructible rises. The Phoenicians bequeathed to humanity gifts that no fire could consume, no army could conquer, no empire could erase. The alphabet endures. Those 22 symbols, born in the workshops of Byblos and refined in the counting houses of Tyre, travel pathways no Phoenician ship ever sailed. Greek merchants adopt the letters, adding vowels to create the script that will record Homer and Plato. From Greek flows Latin, the language of Rome's laws and literature. Hebrew scribes use Phoenician forms to preserve their sacred texts. Arabic calligraphers trace their elegant curves back to these same coastal origins. Every letter on this page, every word in every European language, every text message sent across modern networks carries within it the genetic code of Phoenician innovation. The archaeological sites whisper their secrets slowly. At Byblos, excavators uncover layer upon layer of continuous habitation stretching back 7,000 years. The harbor moles of Tyre, now connected permanently to the mainland by Alexander's Causeway, still define the modern city's coastline. In Tunisia, the Tophet of Carthage yields thousands of inscribed stelae, each one a fragment of lost prayers. Spanish beaches reveal Phoenician trading posts. Sardinian towers mark their colonial presence. The purple dye industry leaves behind mountains of crushed murex shells, silent testimony to an economy built on color. Navigation techniques pioneered by Phoenician sailors persist in maritime tradition. The practice of using stellar observation for open ocean voyaging, the understanding of seasonal wind patterns, the knowledge of coastal landmarks passed from captain to apprentice across generations. All these methods guided ships for millennia after the last Phoenician vessel rotted in its harbor. The concept of international commerce itself bears their fingerprint. Before the Phoenicians, trade meant local exchange or royal gift-giving between monarchs. After them, the Mediterranean understood networks, credit arrangements, standardized weights, and the idea that peaceful commerce could generate wealth more reliably than conquest. Banking families of medieval Italy, trading companies of Renaissance Europe, global corporations of the modern age all operate within frameworks the Phoenicians first imagined. Their religious concepts traveled westward with their colonies. Baal worship influenced Greek understanding of Zeus. Astarte merged with Aphrodite in syncretic coastal cults. The dying and rising god, Melkart, contributed to Mediterranean religious imagination in ways scholars still debate. Even their destruction carries meaning. Carthage's fall demonstrated to Rome the terrible cost of total war, the moral weight of annihilating a civilization. The phrase that demanded their destruction echoes through history as a warning about the dangers of fear-driven policy. Modern Lebanon claims Phoenician heritage with pride. The cedar tree adorns the national flag, recalling those ancient forests that built the fleets of kings. Genetic studies reveal that Lebanese populations carry markers linking them to Bronze Age coastal inhabitants. The identity persists, transformed but unbroken. In museums across the world, Phoenician artifacts catch the light. Glass vessels shimmer with iridescence acquired through millennia underground. Ivory carvings display craftsmanship that still astonishes. Purple-stained pottery fragments hint at vanished luxury. Each object represents a civilization that chose creation over conquest, trade over tribute, innovation over imitation. The Phoenicians proved that greatness need not require vast territories or massive armies. A narrow coastal strip, blessed with timber and cursed with limited farmland, produced a culture whose influence exceeded empires 100 times its size. They demonstrated that ideas travel farther than soldiers, that commerce builds more lasting connections than conquest, that the pen truly outlasts the sword. Their story ends not with destruction, but with transformation, not with silence, but with every word ever written in alphabetic script. The children of the coast became ancestors to all literate civilization. Thank you for journeying through the complete history of this remarkable civilization. If you have found value in this exploration of the ancient world, Please consider subscribing to ensure you never miss our future documentaries bringing history to life.